I got to the Fairview Hotel that evening at 6:40, 10 minutes early, the way I show up to everything, a habit from 20 years of learning that the first 10 minutes of any room tell you more than the rest of the night combined. The windward room on the second floor had been done up exactly the way Elena wanted it, warm gold lighting, a small jazz trio in the corner, her firm's name on a discreet placard by the entrance next to a second one that read "Congratulations, Elena Reyes Hale, partner." I'd paid the deposit on that room myself, $4,200 charged to our joint account the month before, because her firm's event budget covered the bar and nothing else, and I hadn't thought twice about writing the check. I found her near the entrance in a deep green dress I hadn't seen before, hair down instead of the tight professional twist she wore to the office, and for just a second when she saw me cross the room, something flickered across her face that I couldn't quite name at the time. I know now what it was. It was the look of someone doing math in real time about how the rest of the night was going to go. "You made it," she said, and kissed my cheek quickly, already scanning the room over my shoulder for someone more important to talk to. "Of course I made it," I said. "This is a big night." "It is," she agreed, and something in the way she said it made it sound less like agreement and more like a fact she was still getting used to. I spent the next half hour doing what a supportive spouse does at these things, shaking hands with partners whose names I'd only ever seen on invoices before, making small talk with associates who clearly had no idea who I was beyond Elena's husband, the guy who apparently did something in real estate. I saw James Calloway across the room at one point, in conversation with the managing partner, and I raised my glass to him in a small, polite gesture, because as far as I knew that night, he was simply the mentor my wife had talked about constantly for 6 years. He raised his glass back and smiled at me in a way I've replayed more times than I'd like to admit since, trying to decide whether there was anything in it I should have caught in the moment. I don't think there was. I think he was simply a good enough liar that it never showed. At 7:30, the room began to quiet as staff circulated to top off champagne glasses, and Elena made her way toward the small podium set up near the jazz trio. I found a spot near the back, next to a pillar wrapped in string lights, because I've never liked being the center of a room even when the night is technically about someone I love, and I watched my wife step up to a microphone to give the speech that would end our marriage before either of us had said the word divorce out loud. The ballroom went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when everyone in it is pretending not to listen. I was standing near the back, next to a pillar wrapped in string lights, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, when my wife tapped a fork against her glass and stepped up to the small podium the Fairview Hotel had set up for her. 40-some people turned toward her. Partners. Associates. A few clients in expensive blazers. Her parents, flown in from Sacramento. My mother-in-law was already crying happy tears before Elena said a single word. 6 years ago, Elena began, I walked into Whitfield, Cross and Bloom as a second-year associate who didn't think she belonged in the room. Tonight I'm standing here as the newest partner at the firm. Applause. Glasses raised. I raised mine too, because that's what you do, because I meant it, because I had spent 6 years watching her build this. I want to thank a few people, she said, and she went down the list. James Calloway, the litigation chair who'd mentored her since her 3rd year. Priya, her paralegal, for babysitting deadlines Elena would have missed. Her parents, for believing in her before anyone else did. Then she paused. She looked out at the room, and I watched her find my face specifically, deliberately, the way you look at someone right before you say something you've rehearsed. And I want to be honest about something, she said, because I think honesty matters more than a polished speech. There were years when I almost didn't make it. When I almost walked away from this firm entirely. And if I'm being real with all of you, a lot of that had to do with things going on at home. With the pressure of trying to hold a marriage together while also trying to build a career. My husband Marcus has had a hard time adjusting to my success, and there were nights I came home from this office and it felt like the last thing waiting for me was another fight about why I was working late again. So this partnership isn't just something I earned in spite of the job. It's something I earned in spite of a lot of things. She smiled. The room clapped. A few people glanced at me with the soft, uncomfortable sympathy you give a man who's just been quietly gutted in front of 40 witnesses and told to smile through it. I clapped too. I want you to understand that. I stood in that ballroom, glass in hand, and I clapped for the woman who had just told a room full of her colleagues that I was the obstacle she'd overcome. Not the man who co-signed the loan on her bar prep course. Not the man who took over every dinner, every grocery run, every school pickup for her niece when she was staying with us during Elena's second year of trial work. Not the man who sat up with her at 2 a.m. quizzing her on deposition strategy from a legal pad because she couldn't afford a tutor and I wouldn't let her try to do it alone. The obstacle. I want to tell you exactly how we got here, because by the time I understood what that sentence really meant, and what she'd actually been doing behind it, the woman giving that speech had already made a decision. She just hadn't told me what it was yet. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 43 years old. I own and run Hale Development Group, a commercial real estate and construction firm based in Seattle, and depending on who you ask, I'm either a careful, disciplined businessman or a man who married a woman who was never quite sure I was good enough for the room she was trying to walk into. I started the company at 25 with $11,000 of savings and a used pickup truck, doing small residential remodels around Ballard and Fremont because nobody would give a 25-year-old a commercial contract worth talking about. By 30 I had a crew of 6 and my first mixed-use build in Georgetown. By 40 I had 60 employees, offices in 2 states, and a reputation in the Seattle development community for being the guy who reads every line of every contract himself before anyone else on the team touches it, a habit that has occasionally made me slow and has never once made me sorry. I tell you all of this not to brag about it, but because it matters for what comes later. I did not build any of it by accident, and I did not build it by being a man who reacts before he thinks. Both of those things can be true. That's the part nobody tells you about marriage. You can build an entire adult life around discipline and patience and still, somehow, be the last person in the room to see what's happening right in front of you. Before I explain what I did after that party, let me tell you how Elena Reyes became Elena Hale, because the story of how we got to that ballroom is the story that, in hindsight, explains everything. I met Elena 8 years ago at a fundraiser my company sponsored for a legal aid nonprofit in Pioneer Square. She was 26, a paralegal at a small firm downtown, wearing a black dress she later told me she'd borrowed from her roommate because she didn't own anything nice enough for a room full of donors. I was 35. I'd already built Hale Development into a firm doing $12 million a year in commercial builds, mostly mixed-use retail and office conversions around the Puget Sound area, and I'd learned to spot 2 things in people: talent that hadn't been given a chance yet, and hunger that was real instead of performed. Elena had both. She corrected a partner at her own firm's table on a point of contract law that night, gently, but she corrected him, and I watched him realize she was right in real time. I liked that. I liked it more than I've liked almost anything in a business meeting in 20 years of sitting across tables from men who think confidence and correctness are the same thing. We talked for 40 minutes that night about nothing important. Her Sacramento childhood. Her father's hardware store. The law school application she was terrified to send in because she didn't think she'd get in anywhere good. I told her, half joking, that I'd bet money she'd get into her top choice. She got into University of Washington School of Law 4 months later, and I was the first person outside her family she called. I called her 2 days after that fundraiser, which was not something I did, because at 35 I'd already decided I was too busy running a company to bother with dating seriously, and I told her I wanted to take her to dinner somewhere that wasn't a borrowed dress in a room full of donors. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence. We went to a small Italian place in Ballard that's since closed, and she talked for 2 hours straight about a housing discrimination case her firm was working, the kind of case that paid nothing and mattered enormously, and I remember thinking, somewhere around the second glass of wine, that I hadn't met anyone in a decade who cared about anything the way she cared about that case. We dated for a year before I proposed. I want to be honest that it wasn't a small year. She met my father within the first 2 months, and he liked her instantly, in the specific way my father likes people who ask him real questions about his work instead of polite ones. She met Ryan not long after, and the two of them argued about Seahawks personnel decisions for an entire Thanksgiving dinner in a way that told me she'd already found her footing in my family faster than most people ever did. I met her parents in Sacramento that spring, her father's hardware store smaller than I'd pictured, her mother warm in a way that made the 6-hour drive feel worth it before we'd even sat down for dinner. I proposed on a trip to Lake Chelan, actually, the same lake that would come to mean something entirely different to me 4 years later, though at the time it was just a place we'd gone because Elena had never seen the eastern side of the state and wanted to. I asked her on the dock behind the little rental cabin we'd booked, no ring hidden in dessert, no elaborate setup, just the two of us and a lake going pink at sunset, and she said yes and then immediately asked if we could still make our dinner reservation because she was starving, which is the single most Elena response I could imagine, and it made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped the ring box in the water. We got married 2 years after we met, a small ceremony at a vineyard in Woodinville, 60 guests, her mother crying through the vows, my father giving a toast that made half the room laugh and the other half cry, something about how he'd worried for years that I'd built a company instead of a life, and how relieved he was to finally be wrong about something. It was, by every account anyone who was there will give you, a good day. I still believe that. Whatever came after it doesn't erase that a version of us, standing at that altar, meant every word we said to each other. Law school started that fall. And I want to be specific about what the next 4 years actually looked like, because Elena's version of it, the version she gave a room full of people at the Fairview Hotel, is not the version I lived. Year 1 tuition, $41,000. I paid it without her asking, because I'd told her the day she got her acceptance letter that money would never be the reason she didn't finish something she'd worked that hard to start. Year 2, $44,000. Year 3, $46,000, plus a bar prep course that ran another $6,000 on top of it. I covered the mortgage on our house in Ravenna entirely on my own for 3 straight years so her law school loans wouldn't balloon past what she could manage. I bought her a new laptop the week hers died during finals week of her second year, walked into the Apple store on my lunch break and had it set up and waiting on the kitchen counter before she got home, because I didn't want her to lose a single study hour to a hardware failure. I picked up her niece from school twice a week for an entire semester so Elena could sit in the law library until close, learned the girls' favorite snacks, sat through 2 full seasons of a cartoon about talking dogs I could still describe scene by scene if you asked me to. I learned to cook 4 dishes competently because she was too exhausted most nights to do more than reheat something, and I wanted her to come home to a kitchen that smelled like someone had thought about her day even when I hadn't seen her since 6 in the morning. I drove her to the bar exam both mornings it was administered, sat in the parking lot of the convention center in Tacoma for 6 hours each day doing conference calls from my car because I didn't want her walking out to an empty curb. When she got her results, I was the one who opened the email first, my hands shaking worse than hers, because she said she couldn't bear to look. I read her the word pass out loud in our kitchen and she cried into my shoulder for a full 10 minutes before either of us said anything else. I didn't keep a ledger. I want to be clear about that, because when this story gets ugly later, I don't want it to sound like I was quietly tallying receipts the whole time, waiting to present an invoice. I wasn't. I was building a life with someone I believed in, the same way I'd built every project my company had ever finished, brick by brick, without needing anyone to hand me a thank you note halfway through. I remember one dinner in particular, early in her second year, that I've thought about more than almost any other memory from that period, because of what I now understand was happening underneath it. Elena had invited 2 colleagues from her summer associate cohort over to our house in Ravenna for dinner, the kind of low-stakes networking she did constantly back then, and one of them was James Calloway, along with his wife at the time, a soft-spoken woman named Renee who barely said 20 words all evening. I made a braised short rib I'd been practicing for a month specifically because Elena had mentioned Calloway appreciated good food. I remember him complimenting the wine pairing, remember him telling a long story about a trial he'd won in his 30s that had made his name at the firm, remember Elena watching him tell it with the particular attentiveness she used to reserve, in earlier years, for me. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Why would I have? He was 46, married, twice her age and professional seniority, exactly the kind of person you're supposed to impress at a dinner like that. I refilled his glass twice that night and told him to come by again whenever he wanted. I have no idea, to this day, whether anything had already started between them by then, or whether that dinner was simply the night the idea of it first occurred to either of them. I've stopped trying to pinpoint the exact moment, because it doesn't change anything about what came after. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that sometime during her second year of law school, Elena had started spending a significant amount of time with a man named James Calloway. James Calloway was a litigation partner at a mid-sized firm downtown, Whitfield, Cross and Bloom, where Elena had landed a coveted summer associate position after her first year. He was 48 at the time, married, with 2 teenagers, and he had the kind of reputation in Seattle's legal circles that made junior associates either terrified of him or desperate for his attention. Elena was the second kind. She came home talking about him constantly that first summer. Calloway thinks I have real trial instincts. Calloway wants me on the Meridian deposition. Calloway said I remind him of himself at my age. I didn't think anything of it at the time, because that's what mentorship in big law looks like from the outside, and because I trusted my wife the way you trust someone you've built a life with, which is to say completely, and maybe a little carelessly. She got the offer to return to Whitfield, Cross and Bloom full-time after graduation. Calloway made sure of it personally. He became her assigned mentor once she started as a first-year associate, and over the next 4 years, as she worked her way from associate toward the partnership track, Calloway was the name that came up at every dinner, every late night, every crisis she talked through with me at our kitchen table. I started noticing things about 8 months before that party. Small things. The kind of things you file away without admitting to yourself you're building a case. Her phone stopped staying on the counter. For 6 years she'd left it face down on the kitchen island while we ate dinner, and then one week it just wasn't there anymore, and when I asked where it was she said she'd started keeping it in her bag because notifications were distracting her from actually being present with me. It was, on its face, a reasonable thing to say. It was also the kind of reasonable thing you say when you've decided you need your phone somewhere I can't glance at it. Her hours changed in a way that didn't track with any case I recognized. Elena had always talked to me about her caseload, the way she'd talked to me about her classes in law school. For 6 years I'd known the names of her clients, the shape of her deadlines, the rhythm of trial prep versus discovery versus the quiet stretches between. And then, starting that spring, she started working late on nights that didn't correspond to anything she'd mentioned, coming home at 11, at midnight, smelling faintly of wine she said was from a client dinner she hadn't told me about in advance. She stopped asking about my business. This is the one that actually hurt, more than the late nights, more than the phone. For 6 years Elena had been the person I came home and talked through deals with. She had opinions about my projects. She'd tell me when she thought a contractor was overbilling me, and half the time she was right. And then, sometime that spring, she just stopped asking. I'd bring something up over dinner and she'd nod along and change the subject within 2 sentences, the way you do with a show you've quietly stopped watching but haven't told anyone you've stopped watching. The last thing, the thing that actually kept me up at night before I had any proof of anything, was the way she started looking at me. Not through me exactly. Past me. Like I was a piece of furniture in a house she was already mentally moving out of, cataloging which pieces she'd want to keep and which she'd leave behind. There were smaller things too, the kind you only notice in hindsight once the bigger pattern has already revealed itself to you. She started going to a new gym across town instead of the one 4 blocks from our house, and when I asked why, she said the classes were better, which might even have been true. She stopped wearing her wedding ring to the office, said the firm had a policy discouraging visible jewelry during client meetings, which I later learned was not a policy that existed anywhere in that firm's handbook. She started referring to weekend depositions in Chelan and Wenatchee that never appeared on the shared calendar we'd kept since our first year of marriage, the one where we used to log everything from her trial dates to my site visits so neither of us was ever caught flat-footed by the other's schedule. That calendar simply stopped reflecting her actual life at some point, and I didn't notice the gap until I went looking for it after the fact. One night, about 4 months before the party, I asked her directly, not as an accusation, just as a question a husband asks, whether everything was okay between us. She said yes without hesitating, then added that law school and the partnership track had just been a lot, that she felt stretched thin, and that she appreciated me being patient with her through it. I remember feeling relieved by that answer at the time, the way you feel relieved when a doctor tells you a strange symptom is nothing to worry about. I didn't yet know enough to recognize that the answer had been rehearsed too, smooth in exactly the way her partnership speech would later be smooth, a sentence built to close a conversation rather than open one. If you've ever lived through the slow version of this, the kind where nothing single thing is ever quite enough to justify the conversation, you already know exactly the feeling I'm describing. Let me know in the comments if you've been there, because I think more people have than ever admitted out loud, and if you want the rest of this story, stick with me, because it gets worse before it gets better. I didn't confront her. I want to explain why, because I know how that sounds from the outside, like I was either oblivious or cowardly, and I promise you it was neither. I've spent 18 years building a company by learning one central lesson about negotiation, which is that confrontation without information is just noise. You don't walk into a room and accuse someone of something you can't prove. You watch. You gather what you can gather. You wait until you understand the actual shape of what's happening, and then you decide what to do about it from a position where you already know more than the other person thinks you do. So I watched. And I let Elena plan her partnership celebration under the assumption that I would show up, stand near the back, clap when she thanked the people who'd mattered, and go home with her at the end of the night as the supportive husband who'd helped make all of it possible. The party I paid for, by the way. Elena had asked if we could put the Fairview Hotel deposit on our joint account because her firm's event budget only covered the open bar, not the room rental, and I'd said of course, because that's what 18 years of marriage teaches you to say. $4,200 for a room I stood in the back of while my wife told 40 people I was the reason she almost didn't make it. I want to walk you through exactly what happened after that speech, because the next 6 hours are the 6 hours that changed the rest of my life, and I didn't raise my voice once. I found Elena near the bar afterward, surrounded by 3 associates still congratulating her. I waited until there was a gap and I told her I was proud of her, which was true, and that I needed to head out early because I had a 7 a.m. call with a contractor on the Interbay project, which was also true. She barely looked at me. She said okay, have a good night, and turned back to her associates before I'd finished the sentence. I drove home. I poured 2 fingers of the Woodinford Reserve I keep for nights I need to think clearly instead of feel anything, and I sat down at the desk in my study, and I opened my laptop, and I did something I am not proud of and also do not regret, which is that I logged into the shared cloud photo account Elena and I had used for 8 years to back up pictures from trips and holidays. The same account her phone had been silently syncing to the entire time she thought she'd hidden it from me by moving it into her bag. I found the first photo from 14 months earlier. A hotel room in Chelan. Elena and James Calloway, her head on his shoulder, a bottle of wine on the nightstand behind them. There were 41 more photos after that one, spanning 14 months, most of them from what I now understood were the trial prep retreats and out-of-town depositions she'd told me about in careful, boring detail, the kind of detail that's specifically designed to make a story sound too dull to question. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest, because the version of this where I tell you I felt nothing but cold clarity is not the true version. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a teenager watching my parents' marriage end at our kitchen table. Completely blindsided, in a way that made the room tilt slightly. And then, slowly, something else settled in underneath it. The same thing that settles into me when a project is going sideways and I have to decide in real time whether to salvage it or walk away and cut the loss cleanly. I picked up my phone and I started making calls. The first call was to my attorney, Patricia Nguyen. Patricia has handled every piece of legal work for Hale Development for the past 9 years, and she has the particular gift of never once asking why you need something before she tells you how fast she can get it done. She picked up on the second ring, which for 11:30 at night on a Thursday told me she'd already half expected a call like this eventually, though she'd never say so out loud. Marcus. What happened? I told her. Not everything, not yet, just the shape of it. The speech. The photos. 14 months. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "How fast do you want to move?" "I want the separation paperwork ready before she's back from her party." "Done." "What else?" "Here's the piece of this story that I haven't told you yet, the piece that actually matters more than the photos, because photos end a marriage but they don't end a career, and I was about to end both in the same 12 hours. Whitfield, Cross and Bloom's single largest client, accounting for roughly 22% of the firm's annual billings, was Hale Development Group. I want to say that plainly so you understand the scope of it. 6 years earlier, before Elena had ever set foot in that building as an employee, my company had signed on with Whitfield, Cross and Bloom for all of our commercial real estate legal work, entity structuring, zoning disputes, construction contracts, the works. It wasn't nepotism that got Elena hired there in the first place, she'd earned that job on her own merit before we'd even started dating seriously. But over the years, as our relationship deepened and as Hale Development grew from $12 million a year to just over 60, the firm's billings from my company grew right alongside it. By the year of that party, Hale Development was paying Whitfield, Cross and Bloom north of $1.8 million annually in legal fees. And here is the detail that I know, because I sit on the other side of enough deal tables to understand exactly how partnership economics work at a firm like that: origination credit. The partners who bring in and retain major clients get credit for that business against their own compensation and their own case for advancement. James Calloway had, for the last 3 years, quietly listed Hale Development Group as a client relationship he personally managed and had helped retain, specifically citing his close working relationship with our in-house point of contact. Our in-house point of contact was my wife. Elena's rise to partner hadn't rested only on her trial work. A meaningful part of the case for her partnership, the case Calloway had championed in committee meetings I wasn't in the room for but Patricia later helped me confirm through discovery, was built on the strength and stability of the firm's relationship with Hale Development. My company. My contracts. My money. The very foundation Elena had used to build her legitimacy inside that firm was a relationship I had built, sitting in her orbit the entire time she was deciding I was the reason she almost didn't make it. I want to pull Hale Development's business from Whitfield, Cross and Bloom, I told Patricia. All of it. Every open matter, every retainer, gone by Monday morning. There was a pause. Longer than the first one. "Marcus, that's $1.8 million a year. You understand what that does to that firm's numbers, and you understand what it does to a brand new partner whose origination story is tied directly to your account." "I understand exactly what it does," I said. "That's why I'm doing it tonight. I want to be precise about my reasoning, because I know how this sounds, and I've turned it over in my head more times than I can count in the months since. I wasn't trying to destroy Elena's career out of spite. I want that on the record clearly. What I was doing was removing myself, entirely and immediately, from a professional relationship that had become inseparable from a personal betrayal I could no longer stomach being adjacent to. I was not going to sit across a conference table from James Calloway discussing indemnification clauses while he was the man my wife had been disappearing to hotel rooms in Chelan with for 14 months. That wasn't punishment. That was just the plain, unavoidable consequence of the relationship being over, on every level it had ever existed. "Find us new counsel," I told Patricia. "A firm with no connection to Whitfield, Cross and Bloom, no overlapping partners, nothing. I want the transition letter drafted tonight and sent first thing Friday morning, and I want it to state clearly and factually that Hale Development is terminating the relationship effective immediately due to a fundamental conflict of interest. There's going to be transition costs," Patricia said. "New counsel will need weeks to get up to speed on the open matters, especially the Interbay zoning appeal and the 2 ground leases still in negotiation. That's not free, and it's not instant. I understand that. I'd rather eat 6 weeks of inefficiency with a firm I trust than one more day of business with a firm I don't. Any preference on who picks it up? Someone in Bellevue or downtown, mid-size, no history with Whitfield's partners. You'll know better than I will who fits. "I've got 2 names already," she said, and I could hear her typing as she spoke, could picture her at her kitchen table at nearly midnight already building the list. "I'll have both on a call with you by 9 tomorrow morning." She said she'd have the transition letter ready by 6 a.m., and true to her word, it was sitting in my inbox at 5:52, 3 clean paragraphs that used the word conflict of interest exactly twice and never once used any language that could be read as an accusation, because Patricia has never in 9 years sent me a document that gave anyone room to sue us for it. The second call I made was to my brother, Ryan. Ryan is 40, runs a marine logistics company out of the Ballard docks, and he is, aside from our father, the person I trust most in the world. We talk most weeks, usually about nothing important, boats or football or our mother's garden. He picked up on the 4th ring, groggy. "It's almost midnight, what's wrong?" I told him. All of it. The speech. The photos. Callaway. The account. He was quiet in a way Ryan is rarely quiet. Then he said, "Do you want me to come over?" "Not yet. I need to think clearly first." "Okay. But Marcus, are you sure about the account? That's a lot of business to pull over one man." "It's not about one man," I said. "It's about the fact that I can no longer trust anyone at that firm to have handled my company's confidential business dealings with any integrity, given what I now know about how at least one senior partner there conducts himself. That's not emotional. That's a legitimate risk assessment, and Patricia will back me on it." Ryan let out a slow breath. "You already had that answer ready before you called me." "I did." "Then why'd you call?" "Because I needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't tell me I was wrong." He was quiet again, and then he said the thing I've thought about more than almost anything else anyone said to me that week. "Dad always said the worst thing you can do after getting hit is throw the first punch back before you've steadied your feet. You've clearly already steadied yours. So do what you need to do. I'll be at your place by 8. The third call, the one that mattered most, was to our father. Walt Hale is 74, spent 30 years running his own small general contracting business before handing the tools down to me, and lives alone in the house in Tacoma where Ryan and I grew up, 3 years now since our mother passed. He taught me how to read a contract before I could legally sign one. He taught me that the most important decision in any deal isn't the one you make when things are going well, it's the one you make in the 10 minutes after you realize you've been had. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time, longer than either Ryan or Patricia had been. "Did she know what she was doing?" he asked, "the whole time she was doing it?" "Yes." "Then she made her choice a long time ago. Tonight she just let you see it." "What do I do, Dad?" "You already know what you're going to do. You're calling me so somebody says it's all right." "It's all right, Marcus. Close it down clean. Don't scream. Don't make a scene in front of people who'll remember it wrong later and tell the story to make you look small. Just close the door quiet and let the quiet do the talking for you." "I keep thinking about how long it must have been going on before I noticed anything," I said. "What that says about me, that I missed it for that long." "It doesn't say what you think it says," he said. "It says you trusted somebody, which used to be a virtue before people started treating it like a weakness to exploit. Don't let this teach you the wrong lesson, Marcus. The lesson isn't stop trusting people. The lesson is pay attention to what people do, not what they say, and you're already doing that tonight better than most men manage in a year." I didn't say anything for a moment, and he let the silence sit there the way he always has, never rushing to fill it the way some people do out of discomfort. "Your mother would have told you to sleep on it," he said eventually. "I'm telling you the opposite. Some decisions get worse the longer you sit with them, because you talk yourself into smaller versions of the right thing out of fear of how it'll look. This isn't one of those. Do it tonight, while you still know exactly why you're doing it." I hung up and finished my bourbon, and sat for a while just looking at the room, the built-in bookshelves I'd installed myself the first year we bought the Ravenna house, the desk chair Elena had picked out because she said the one I'd chosen looked like it belonged in a dentist's office. 6 years of a life accumulate in a room like that without you ever noticing it happening, and it's strange, packing a bag in the middle of the night, to realize how much of what surrounds you belongs to a version of your life you no longer have any claim to. At midnight, I moved every personal document, every file relating to Hale Development's business at Whitfield, Cross and Bloom, off our shared home network and onto a private server only I had access to. I packed a bag with 3 days of clothes, my father's old tape measure that had sat on my desk since he retired, and the framed photo of my mother that had lived on our mantel since our wedding, because I did not want it in a house I no longer trusted the atmosphere of. Then I sat in the dark of the study and waited. Elena came home at 1:47 in the morning. I heard her keys in the door, heard her drop her heels by the entryway the way she always did, a habit from law school she'd never broken, shedding the weight of the night the second she crossed the threshold. She stopped in the doorway of the study when she saw the desk lamp on. "You're still up," she said. "I am." She was still in the deep green dress she'd worn to the party, her makeup softened from a long night, a looseness in her posture that told me she'd had enough champagne to feel warm instead of careful. "We should talk about my speech," she said. "I think it came out wrong. I didn't mean it the way it probably sounded." "How did you mean it?" She sat down slowly in the chair across from my desk, the same chair she'd sat in 100 nights over the years while I helped her run through cross-examination questions, while she told me about her first jury verdict, while we'd built, or so I thought, an entire life out of nights just like that one. "I meant that marriage is hard when one person is climbing and the other person is standing still," she said. "I meant that there were nights the tension between us made it harder to focus. I wasn't trying to say you sabotaged me. I was trying to be honest about the cost of everything." "Standing still," I repeated. "Marcus, I didn't mean. How's Chelan this time of year?" I said. I want to tell you that I felt something dramatic in that moment, watching her face change, but mostly what I felt was a kind of quiet confirmation, the way you feel when a hypothesis you didn't want to be right turns out to be right anyway. Her face didn't crumble. It just went very still, the particular stillness of someone recalculating in real time how much I actually knew. "What are you talking about?" she said, but there was no real question in it. 14 months, Elena. 42 photos on an account you forgot we still shared. I know about James Calloway. I know he championed your partnership case, and I know he did it in part because your husband's company is a client relationship the two of you apparently used to build both of your careers. She didn't deny it. I want to give her that much credit, even now. She sat back in the chair and was quiet for almost a full minute, and when she spoke again her voice had lost the practiced quality it had carried into the room. "It's been going on for about 14 months, she said. "I didn't plan it. I know that's what everyone says. It's true anyway. I didn't ask you to justify it. I know. I'm telling you because I owe you that much. What do you want, Elena?" She looked at me directly then, in a way she hadn't in months. "I want a divorce," she said. "I think I've wanted it for longer than I've let myself admit. I think somewhere in the last 2 years I became someone you didn't build a life for anymore, and I didn't know how to tell you that without destroying everything you'd already given me." "You didn't need to destroy it," I said. "You needed to tell me the truth 18 months ago, and let me decide what to do with it as a grown man instead of deciding for me by simply not saying anything. I know. You stood in front of 40 people tonight and told them I was the reason you almost didn't make it. Marcus, I was drinking, I was emotional, people say things at podiums that don't. You didn't slur a single word of that speech," I said. "You didn't stumble on a single sentence of it. You said exactly what you meant to say, and you said it in front of the committee that decides whether you keep your title next year. That wasn't a slip. That was a strategy, whether you've admitted that to yourself yet or not." She flinched at that, actually flinched, like I'd reached across the desk and touched her. "That's not fair. Explain to me what's fair about it, then. Explain what part of standing at a podium and telling your colleagues your husband nearly cost you your career, while you were 14 months into an affair with the man who spent that same stretch of time championing your case in committee, is fair to me." Something shifted in her face. A flicker of what might have been shame, replaced almost as fast by something harder, more defensive. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. I was trying to be vulnerable about the hard parts of the last few years. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You thanked James Calloway by name for believing in you, I said. You thanked your parents. You thanked your paralegal. And the only thing you found to say about me, in a room full of your colleagues and the partners who will decide your future at that firm, was that I nearly cost you your career. Do you understand what that does to a person, Elena? Do you understand what it does to hear that from the person you built your entire adult life around, while you know, and I didn't yet, that the truth was the exact opposite of what you just said out loud? She didn't answer. I let the silence sit there the way I'd learned to let silence sit in negotiations, because the person who fills it first usually reveals the most. What did Calloway actually do for your partnership case, I asked, beyond mentoring you? A long pause. He advocated for me in committee. He's been my biggest supporter at the firm. He listed Hale Development as a client relationship he personally retained, I said. Because of you. Because of me, technically, since I'm the one who's been paying that firm $1.8 million a year for 6 years. Your partnership isn't just built on your own work, Elena. A piece of it is built on my business, funneled through an affair I didn't know I was subsidizing. He's not just my mentor, Marcus, he's the reason I made partner at all. If you touch that account you're not hurting him, you're hurting me. I understand that, I said. I understood it before I made the call. I made it anyway, because I'm no longer willing to be the quiet financial backbone of a relationship I only just found out existed. You're being cruel. I'm being honest, for the first time tonight, and you're discovering that honesty and cruelty feel identical when you're the one on the receiving end of it for once. She went very pale. What did you do? I terminated Hale Development's relationship with Whitfield, Cross and Bloom 2 hours ago. The transition letter goes out at 6 a.m. She stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Marcus, that's my firm's biggest account. If that account leaves the week I make partner. I know exactly what it does, I said, and I kept my voice level, because I'd promised myself in that study, alone with my father's advice still echoing, that I was not going to raise my voice in this house one single time that night. It's not my job to protect the economics of a partnership you built in part on a lie. You're punishing me. I'm ending a business relationship I can no longer trust, run by a firm where at least one senior partner apparently thinks it's acceptable to have a 14-month affair with a subordinate he's also grooming for partner. That's not punishment, Elena. Patricia will tell you the same thing your own general counsel would tell any client in this position. That's risk management. She stood there in her green dress, mascara starting to blur at the corners of her eyes, and for the first time in the entire conversation, I watched her actually understand the size of what had happened. I'm staying at the Sorrento tonight, I said, standing. Patricia will be in touch about the separation filing in the morning. Get some sleep. You made partner today. That's real, regardless of everything else that's also true. And I left. I was in my suite at the Sorrento Hotel on First Hill when Patricia called at 6:20 the next morning. The letter went out, she said. Whitfield, Cross and Bloom's managing partner called my office 9 minutes after it landed. He wants a call today. Tell him I'm not available today. He's going to want to know if there's any version of this that's salvageable. There isn't. He's also going to ask if this is personal. Tell him it's a conflict of interest. He can draw his own conclusions about the rest. By 8:40 that morning, I know the exact time because I was watching my phone the way you watch a stock ticker on a day you already know which direction it's moving. My phone started ringing. Elena first. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. Then a text. Marcus, call me right now, this is my career. Then another. What did you actually do? HR is asking me questions. Then a third, longer one, the kind of message that starts composed and falls apart by the third sentence. I don't understand how you could do this the same week I made partner. I know I hurt you. I know I deserve some of this. But you're punishing 40 people who had nothing to do with what happened between us. At 9:15, a number I didn't have saved called twice in a row. I let it ring out both times. He left a voicemail the second time, 31 seconds long, that Patricia later played for me over speakerphone in her office. Marcus, this is James Calloway. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here that's affecting people well beyond you and me, and I'd like the chance to talk this through like professionals. Please call my office. I listened to it twice, admired, in a detached way, how carefully it had been worded, how it managed to mention professionalism without once mentioning the word affair, and then I deleted it. By 10 that morning I had 31 missed calls between the two of them combined, plus 2 from a number that turned out to belong to the firm's managing partner, a man named Robert Whitfield himself, whom I had met exactly twice at client holiday parties and who I imagine was, by that point, doing very fast arithmetic in his head about what a 22% revenue loss looked like against his firm's annual partner distributions. I ordered coffee from the hotel restaurant, read the business section of the paper, and let Patricia handle every incoming call from the firm's counsel. At 10:40 there was a knock on my suite door. It was Ryan, exactly as promised, holding 2 coffees from the place on Pike he knows I like and wearing the specific expression he gets when he already knows what happened and came anyway. Dad called me, he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, because that's what Ryan does. Said you'd need company, not advice. I appreciate that. So I'm not giving any. He set a coffee in front of me and sat down across the small table by the window. We sat for a while without talking, the way brothers who've known each other 40 years can sit without needing to fill a silence with anything. The city was grey outside the window, a ferry cutting slowly across the Sound toward Bainbridge. You pulled the account, he said finally. Not a question. This morning. How much was that account worth to them? 1.8 a year. He let out a low whistle. And you're sure? Not sure like you were up all night and it felt right at 2 in the morning. Sure like you'll still feel the same way about it in a year. I've thought about almost nothing else since I found those photos, I said. I'm sure. Okay. He nodded slowly, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Then I'm not going to spend the morning talking you out of something you've clearly already made peace with. I just wanted to hear you say it wasn't just anger talking. It's not that I'm not angry, I said. I am. I don't think I've ever been angrier at anyone in my life. But the account isn't the anger. The account is just the truth of what I can no longer be part of, dressed up in a business decision because that happens to also be true. That's a very you way of putting it, Ryan said, and almost smiled. And the divorce filing. Patricia's drafting it today. Washington's a no-fault state. It'll be clean if she doesn't fight it. Do you think she'll fight it? I think she's about to have a much bigger problem than me to deal with. Ryan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me something nobody else had asked yet. Do you think she loved you? At any point in this, was any of it real? I thought about that longer than I expected to. I think she did, I said eventually. For a long time. I think somewhere around her 3rd year of practice she became someone slightly different than the person I married, and instead of telling me that, she found it easier to let someone else convince her it was my fault that she'd changed. That caption at the party, Ryan said. The speech. That wasn't an accident either. No, I agreed. It wasn't. People do that when they've already decided something's over but they want the other person to be the one who ends it publicly. It's easier to be left than to leave. Does it matter which one happened first? No, I said. Not anymore. Word travels fast in a city the size of Seattle's business community, faster than I expected even knowing how small that world actually is. By early afternoon I'd gotten a text from a developer I'd worked with on and off for a decade, a man named Sam Okafor who ran a competing firm out of South Lake Union, that just said, heard about the Whitfield thing, you good? I told him I was fine, business decision, nothing more, and he wrote back, say no more. Then, half an hour later, if you need a firm that'll actually answer the phone on a Sunday, call Reyes and Tran downtown. They did our refinancing last year and they're sharp. It was, I realized later, the same firm Patricia had already put on her shortlist, which told me something about how small and well-connected that particular circle really was, and how quickly a story like mine could travel through it whether I wanted it to or not. Elena showed up at the Sorrento at 2 that afternoon. Front desk called up first and asked if I was expecting a Ms. Reyes. I told them to send her up. She looked nothing like the composed woman who delivered a partnership speech 18 hours earlier, and nothing like the woman who'd stood in my study at 1 in the morning either. She'd changed into jeans and an old university sweatshirt, hair pulled back without effort, and there was something raw in her face that I recognized, uncomfortably, as the most honest expression I'd seen from her in over a year. Ryan made himself scarce, disappearing into the bedroom with his phone. Elena sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at her hands for a long time before she spoke. Callaway got called into an emergency partners meeting this morning, she said. They're talking about whether to make me an equity partner at all, given the account loss happened the same week as my announcement. They think it looks bad. Optically. Like I can't be trusted with major client relationships. That's a conversation for you to have with your firm. Marcus, please. Just talk to whoever you need to talk to. Tell them it wasn't about me. It was about you, I said. That's the part you don't seem to understand yet. It was never about James Callaway's billable hours. It was about the fact that my company's business I built with my own hands over 18 years, was quietly being used as a bargaining chip in an affair that was also destroying my marriage. I'm not interested in protecting the professional consequences of that for either of you. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. I didn't mean for the speech to come out the way it did. I wasn't trying to blame you publicly. I know you weren't trying to, I said, and I meant it. I think you'd convinced yourself of a version of our marriage where I was the reason things felt hard, because it was easier than admitting you'd chosen to make them hard yourself. But intent doesn't change what you actually said, in front of 40 people, the same day I found out the truth. Is this punishment? She asked. The account. Is that what this is? It's a legitimate business decision, I said. I have zero confidence in a firm's judgment when one of its senior partners conducts himself the way Callaway has. That's not personal, even though I understand why it feels that way to you. What happens to Callaway? She asked quietly, after a moment. That's not something I control anymore, and honestly, it's not something I much care about either way. That's between him and his partners now. They're going to ask me about the timeline. Whether I knew the account would be affected before the speech. Then tell them the truth, I said. You gave that speech before either of us said the word affair out loud. Whatever you knew or didn't know about how it would land, that part's yours to answer for, not mine. She nodded slowly, and something in her posture seemed to settle, the way people sometimes finally exhale once they stop trying to argue their way out of a fact that isn't going to move. She didn't argue further. I think, by that point, some part of her had already run the math the same way I had. The divorce will be straightforward, I told her. I'm not going to be difficult about the split of our accounts or the house. You'll be treated fairly. But I need you to understand something first. I leaned forward slightly. I spent 6 years building a foundation under you. Tuition, the mortgage, the nights I picked up your niece from school so you could sit in a law library. I didn't do any of that because I needed credit for it. I did it because I believed in you the way I believe in the best projects I've ever built, and that's supposed to be enough on its own. What isn't enough is standing in a ballroom and hearing you tell a room full of strangers that I was the weight you had to carry instead of the ground you were standing on. She was crying quietly by the time I finished. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know that's not enough. I believe you, I said. And I did. Take care of yourself. She left. I sat in that suite for a long time after the door closed, watching the ferry make its slow crossing again on the return trip, and I thought about how strange it is that a city can look exactly the same on the worst day of your life as it did on every ordinary day before it. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain. I've turned it over enough times to see it clearly from the outside. A wealthy man yanks $1 million contract out from under a firm the week his wife makes partner, purely because he's hurt, and calls it a business decision to make himself feel better about it. I understand why some people would tell it that way. But here is what actually happened, as plainly as I can say it. I didn't pull that account to punish Elena or to punish James Calloway. I pulled it because the relationship that had made that account sustainable, a relationship built on trust between my company and a firm I believed was handling our confidential business with integrity, was gone the moment I understood what had actually been happening inside it for 14 months. I was not going to sit across a conference table twice a quarter from a man who'd spent over a year in hotel rooms with my wife, discussing indemnification clauses like nothing had happened, for any dollar figure. Not $1.8 million a year. Not 10 times that. I've heard, through the same network of mutual acquaintances that eventually tells you everything, that some people in Elena's circle think I overreacted. That a marriage ending is one thing, but pulling a contract that employed dozens of people at a firm, paralegals and junior associates who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, was an act of collateral damage dressed up as principle. I've sat with that criticism longer than I've sat with almost any other part of this. I don't think it's entirely wrong. I think there is a version of the last 6 months where I found a way to separate my marriage from my business more surgically, where the fallout landed only on the two people who actually deserved it. I also think that version required a kind of surgical patience I did not have available to me at 1 a.m, sitting in a study with 42 photographs open on my laptop screen. I've made peace with that. Not everyone gets to make the perfect decision. Most of us just get to make the honest one, in the moment we're actually in, and live with what follows. People have called me cold in the weeks since this became known in certain circles of Seattle's legal and business community. Calculated. Unfeeling. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. Standing in that ballroom, watching Elena thank everyone in the room except me for helping her get there, and then hearing her say my name attached to the phrase almost didn't make it, I felt every part of what you'd expect a person to feel. The specific kind of grief that doesn't have a clean shape to it. It was in the borrowed black dress from the night we met, still folded in a box in our closet. It was in the framed photo from Woodenford I'd packed into my bag without looking at it too closely. It was in every ordinary object in a house that had quietly stopped being a shared life 18 months before I found out it had. I felt all of it. I simply didn't perform it in that ballroom, or in my study at 1 a.m, or across the table from her at the Sorrento the next afternoon, because I've spent 18 years learning that the decisions that actually matter are made in the moments you most want to react instead of think. Yelling into a phone. Making a scene in a hotel suite. Confronting a man in a ballroom in front of his wife and mine. None of it would have changed a single fact of what had already happened. It would only have made the ending uglier than it needed to be, and given other people a story to tell about me that wasn't true. My father taught me that. 18 years of running my own company taught me that. Close the position cleanly. Know exactly what something is worth before you decide to walk away from it. And let the quiet do the talking the rest of the way. 6 weeks later, I moved into a 2-bedroom condo on Alki Beach that I'd owned as an investment property for years and always liked more than the house in Ravenna I'd bought, in hindsight, mostly because Elena had wanted that neighborhood. 19th floor equivalent views, west-facing, water on 3 sides. Simple. Functional. Entirely mine. My phone rang at 7:15 one morning about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. A number I didn't recognize, area code from somewhere in the Bay Area. Is this Marcus Hale? A man's voice, careful, mid-50s from the sound of it. It is. My name is Daniel Farrow. I run a private development fund out of San Francisco, mostly mixed-use and adaptive reuse projects up and down the West Coast. I've been hearing your name for years through mutual contacts in the Seattle market, and I understand you recently made some changes to your legal representation. I was wondering if you had any interest in a conversation about expanding into the Bay Area with a partner who already has the local relationships. I looked out at the water for a moment before I answered. I have some time next week, I said. For months after that call, Hale Development Group opened a second office in Oakland, a joint venture with Pharaoh's Fund that closed its first 2 projects within the first quarter. The work was the same work I'd always done. The instincts were the same instincts I'd always had. I was, in every way that mattered, the same man. Except that I slept through the night now, in a way I hadn't in longer than I'd let myself admit, no second-guessing, no lying awake next to someone who'd already left in every way that counted long before she ever gave a speech about it. My father came up to see the Alki condo the month after I moved in, stood on the balcony for a long time looking out at the water without saying much, which is how he processes most things. Eventually he said, "Your mother would have liked this view." I told him I thought so too. Then he said the thing I've held on to more than almost anything else anyone said to me that whole year. "You didn't do anything wrong, Marcus. You just finally stopped doing the thing you'd been doing for 6 years, which was making it easy for somebody to take you for granted. That's not cruelty. That's just stopping." I didn't have much to say back to that, so I just stood next to him and let the two of us watch the ferry make its crossing in silence, the way we'd done 100 times before at his own place growing up, except this time it was mine. I found out what actually happened inside Whitfield, Cross and Bloom in the weeks that followed largely through Patricia, who'd stayed in professional contact with the firm's outside counsel during the transition of our files, and partly through Ryan, who still golfs occasionally with a paralegal's husband who worked 2 floors up from litigation. The partnership committee, already rattled by the loss of a client accounting for over a fifth of the firm's annual billings, opened an internal review into how the relationship had been managed once it became clear the account's termination coincided so precisely with Elena's promotion announcement. Callaway was placed on a formal leave of absence within 3 weeks, officially described in an internal memo as a mutual decision regarding a conflict of interest with a client relationship, though everyone who mattered inside that building understood exactly what it meant. He didn't return. I heard, secondhand, that he'd landed at a smaller firm in Bellevue by the following spring, a step down in every way that matters in that world: prestige, comp, the size of the cases that cross your desk. Elena kept her partnership, though not without a fight. The committee debated for nearly 2 months whether to rescind the offer entirely, and from what Patricia gathered, it was ultimately her trial record on its own merits, 4 years of genuinely strong casework that had nothing to do with Callaway or with me, that saved her. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me even in a story where I was badly wronged. Elena is, underneath everything else that happened, a talented lawyer. That part was never a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth either, and for a long time she let the version that flattered her stand in for the version that was actually true. Elena's mother sent me a card about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, a short handwritten note that said only, "Marcus, I don't know everything that happened, and I'm not asking you to explain it to me. I just want you to know that Frank and I always considered you family, and some part of us always will. I take full responsibility for nothing here except hoping you land somewhere good." I kept that card in the top drawer of my desk in the Alki condo for a long time before I finally put it away in a box with a few other things from that chapter of my life, not because it stopped mattering, but because I finally reached a point where I didn't need to keep looking at it to feel steady. Ryan and I still meet most Sundays for coffee, same as we always have, and he still gives me a hard time about the Oakland office being, in his words, a betrayal of the entire Pacific Northwest, but he flew down for the ribbon cutting anyway and stood in the back grinning the whole time. He's the one who first floated the idea, half joking, that I should write all of this down somewhere, that other people going through something similar might find some use in hearing how it actually played out instead of the version that gets flattened into a headline. I told him I'd think about it. This is me thinking about it. There's something clarifying about the thing you feared most actually happening to you. You find out you survive it. You find out the life on the other side of it is not only survivable, but genuinely, unexpectedly, yours in a way the old one had quietly stopped being. I ran into Elena once, about 5 months after the divorce was finalized, on a Tuesday morning outside a coffee shop near Pike Place, the kind of half-second encounter where both people stop because the context is unexpected. She looked well put together in the specific way that takes real effort after a hard stretch. "Marcus," she said. "Elena." A pause. Not an uncomfortable one, just a pause. "How are you?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Really good." "You're getting there," she said, and there was something almost relieved in it. "The firm's doing well. Oakland office opened in the spring." "I heard." "That's good momentum." She hesitated. "I made equity partner in the end. It took a few extra months of committee back and forth after everything, but it happened." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it, more than I expected to. She looked at me for a long moment. "You always meant it," she said quietly. "When you said you believed in me." I know that now, in a way I didn't let myself see clearly for a long time. "Are you seeing anyone?" she asked, and there was nothing accusatory in it, just genuine curiosity, the kind two people who used to know everything about each other still reach for out of habit. "Not really," I said. "Not looking, honestly. I've been putting most of my energy into the Oakland office." She smiled at that, small and a little sad. "That sounds like you. You always did put your energy into building something instead of sitting still with a feeling." She paused. "I don't mean that as a criticism, for once. I think I understand it better now than I did." "How's Priya?" I asked, because I found, standing there, that I still genuinely wanted to know, that 6 years of caring about the small details of her working life hadn't simply switched off the day the divorce was finalized. "She's good. She's actually studying for the LSAT herself now. Says I ruined her by making paralegal work look too interesting." Elena laughed, a real laugh, the kind I remembered from years before any of this, and for just a second the whole 5 months between us collapsed into something almost familiar. I didn't have an answer that would fit into a doorway on a Tuesday morning, so I didn't try to find one. "Take care of yourself," I said. "You too," she said. And we went our separate ways. I thought about that conversation for the rest of the walk back to my car, longer than I expected to. Not with anger, and not really with grief either, at that point, but with something closer to quiet acknowledgement, the way you look at a finished project once the scaffolding finally comes down and see, all at once, both what it became and every version of it that never got built. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 43 years old. I run a development company out of Seattle that I built with my own hands, my own judgment, and a refusal to let the worst night of my life be the thing that defines every night that came after it. 6 months ago, I stood at the back of a ballroom in a suit I'd had pressed that morning and listened to my wife tell a room full of people that I was the reason she almost didn't make it. My life split cleanly into 2 halves that night, the part before I understood what that sentence actually meant, and the part after. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream into a phone or confront a man twice my patience in front of his family. I closed the position, walked away from what no longer worked, and let the quiet finish the job the noise never could have. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about being blindsided by someone you built your whole adult life around. The version of leaving that actually costs the other person something isn't the loud version. It's the version where you simply stop being available to be used, calmly, completely, and on your own schedule instead of theirs. What I found out, standing in that hotel suite and later on the 19th floor of a condo I'd always liked more than the house I gave up, and later still in a conference room in Oakland building something entirely new, is that what remained was substantial. It had always been mine. She just hadn't taken it with her, because it was never hers to take in the first place. I think about that ballroom sometimes, still. Not with the sharpness it used to carry, but the way you think about a scene from a film you saw once a long time ago, familiar but no longer able to reach you the way it did the first time. I think about the version of me standing near that pillar, clapping politely for a speech that was, in real time, quietly ending my marriage in front of 40 strangers, and I don't feel sorry for that man exactly. I feel something closer to respect for him, for managing to keep his hands steady long enough to make the right calls instead of the loud ones on the worst night of his life, without anyone in that room ever seeing it coming until it was already done. And that, in the end, is the only part of any of it that actually matters. Some people who've heard pieces of this story secondhand ask me if I regret any of it, the account, the speed of the paperwork, the way I let the quiet do all the talking instead of saying more in that study at 1 in the morning. I don't. I regret, if I regret anything, that it took me 18 months and 42 photographs to finally see clearly what had probably been visible in smaller ways for far longer than that. But regretting how I found out isn't the same as regretting what I did once I knew. Those are two different questions, and I think a lot of people confuse them when they're trying to decide whether someone in my position acted well or acted cruelly. I know which answer I've made peace with. If this story hit you, let me know in the comments whether you think I handled it the right way, or whether you'd have done something different in that ballroom. And if you want more stories like this one, stick around, because we're just getting started here.